Hello and welcome to episode 268 of the Thursday Night Podcast. My name is Brady, joined again as always by David. Going to be recapping Georgia State's opening loss to Ole Miss on this episode, going into all of it in a segment we're going to go for this week called The Ugly, The Bad, and The Good to kind of set the scene for what was a 63-7 loss. We will touch on some very pressing quarterback news, roster addition news for Georgia State as well, and then preview the Memphis game home opener this Saturday. Going to insert the Ask the Expert series that we've been doing, previewing the games upcoming with someone who knows the other team. Going to show up in the YouTube as a separate interview as well, but we're also going to start inserting that in the middle of the podcast episodes. Still trialing stuff with this, pivoting to video. So you should, week to week, only have the one episode, unless we have a special. Obviously, basketball coming up, hoping to speak to the two coaches of Georgia State basketball over the next couple of weeks leading up to the season. And for example, those will be different episodes that show up on their own in the podcast feed as well. But trying to kind of centralize everything. So one weekly podcast in your podcast feeds, but at least two things coming to the YouTube channel. So however you listen to us, watch us, bit of differentiation there, but I think it makes the most sense. Feedback on what works for you if you'd rather have it just be all separate. That would save me a little bit of time in the editing suite, but I think this makes the most sense, at least for the time being. But I can't delay it any longer. Georgia State 63-7 losers in Oxford to the Ole Miss Rebels in Game 1 of Del McGee's second season at Georgia State. It was 17-7 with about five and change left in the second quarter. Kind of had stemmed an ugly early start. And then the bottom fell out, got kind of obliterated in the middle eight. And then at a certain point, pretty much just waved the white flag in the second half. You started seeing a lot of rotation, especially on defense. And quarterback and just the play calls on offense was kind of an abdication of like, well, we're just going to get this game over with. And it reflected in how Ole Miss outscored Georgia State 38-0 in the second half. The final yardages, it was 695 on total for Ole Miss compared to 260 for Georgia State. 400 exactamundo through the air in Austin Simmons' first start for the Rebels. 295 on the ground, though I will get into it later. The rushing numbers may be a little bit deceptive. I'm not nearly as worried about that as much. Kind of done spelling it out. I mean, we'll get into more things that stood out to us watching this game as we get through it. And the other thing, and this is where I think we have to start as I lay out our segment, the ugly, the bad, and the good, which maybe we'll keep bringing back and we'll order it differently depending on how the game went. But the ugly is where I have to start with this one, with the way it ended, and also with the way it started. Because the thing that Georgia State stood out for in the college football landscape this week, was a pregame incident. Cornerback Tyler Scott, who's listed on the depth chart, goes over. Ole Miss player grabbed his towel, wouldn't give it back. He goes over, grabs the guy's chain, and then throws it into the stands. Is suspended for the game. It's addressed after the game. Del McGee apologized to Coach Kiffin and continued to bring it up. Was asked about it in the Sunbelt Media call. Also asked about it in the weekly presser locally. But a low moment in a game you already lost by 56. Just kind of symptomatic of a really ugly week for Georgia State football. Just the kind of perfect image of like how this was just not the start for the season they were hoping for. And with that, I've said a lot. I'll get out of the way, let David get his initial thoughts going.
Yeah, it's tough, It's really tough because I think you and I, I don't want to put words in your mouth specifically, but I think you and I had a very specific way that we thought that this game would go, that last week would go.
And we did not have pregame incident on our bingo card. Let's start there.
Yeah, you know what?
We're not ready for that stuff. I mean, that stuff hasn't happened in like a decade. Like, the professionalism around this program has not led to that. Like, Sean Elliott cleaned a lot of that stuff up. So it's a discouraging thing in the first game of year 2 under Del McGee that something like that would crop up with one of the guys he brought in this offseason in cornerback Tyler Scott. So discouraging, whatever word you want to describe, a bad look for the program. And it clearly set the tone in whatever way, the football gods control these things. That happens pregame, and the game turns out the way it did.
And, it's... So I saw it on the broadcast, but like I didn't really put two and two together that like, who it was. 'Cause, I don't watch football games with a depth chart in front of me. Sorry if that bothers people.
Well, you didn't have one in front of you. It was only available to the media there in the stadium.
Exactly. But at the same time, like I was curious as to why they had mentioned it a couple of times. And it just sucks because you have that incident, and then Coach McGee has to address it. And then you have the game, and I'm not saying obviously he has to address that because he's a head football coach, but it's just the game left such a sour taste, I think, in, my mouth specifically. And there's good. I love this segment that you're bringing in because I do think that there was good.
But it's also appropriate we talk about it after everything else.
Exactly. And there was, to be blunt, so much bad that it's just like, as you said, not the best way to start year 2 under this, coaching staff. And I want to get this right away after saying that. I don't necessarily put anything on the coaches here. Either the Scott incident, it was, it's not funny what he did, but like these are two, players. Like he was in the SEC last year. He played at Auburn. Like he saw those guys. Like I know he knew who they were. It wasn't necessarily just like a random incident, which I think does make it a little better in my mind.
I mean, it might have been a random incident. I'm not going to assume context I don't know.
Fair.
I also will put a lot on the coaches, but I guess we'll hear your perspective as well.
But what I mean by I don't want to put much on the coaches is I think they had a bad day. I think the second half and where we sit now, I'm very confused as to what they're thinking, what their game plan is. Maybe they're just, not saying anything. It's a coach, that's totally fine. But also at the same time, though, I think it's hard for me to necessarily get on coaches for, something that happened spur of the moment like that. Yes, obviously a good coach, can instruct their players to keep their composure and, obviously you want that to happen. And the Nick Sabans of the world were really good at doing stuff like that. At the end of the day, like Coach McGee said, we're talking about 18 to 22-year-olds. We say that line all the time here on the podcast. And, you were 18 to 22 at one point. I was 18 to 22 at one point. I get it, so it's hard for me to really get on the coaches. But I also recognize that all of last week just left a really bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, I guess it's two lanes, because it's like, I don't think you have to go like he doesn't have control of the program yet with it. This could be an isolated incident, and clearly if something crops up again in a pregame after this, when he's now had to address the team about it specifically, and he's had to address media about it multiple times, then that's a problem.
Yeah, that would be a crazy take to have after this.
The second part of it, though, is I think that the 38-0 in the second half was a choice. And that's not to say that Ole Miss wasn't playing very well, but there was a certain point where they decided, all right, we're going to wrap this up on offense and just not put the ball in harm's way at all, run the ball, get some quick throws. Christian Veyer throws an interception in the third quarter. He doesn't come back into the game. Del McGee says afterwards it wasn't because of the pick or any kind of performance thing. They just wanted to get Cam Brown reps. And Cam Brown, 8 of 14 for 17 yards passing, kind of tells the tale there. Just was not passing downfield. And a lot of that was that they were calling just a bunch of quick screens, a lot of in and like get it out. And Ole Miss had all that stuff contained when they were, going at it full tilt through the course of the game. And so they weren't having success beating them, especially as it became clear that's all they were doing. And when you start doing that, it's no wonder that the team feeds off of that in a negative way. And like the body language gets worse, the effort gets worse on the field, the defense, as you start rotating in some younger guys, even with Ole Miss backups in who are competing for their jobs, you start to see it slip. And it's just like, as the offense is giving you nothing, it just basically get off the field and punt. The defense gets worn down. The defense, is going up against guys that are playing like they want it more. And I say that putting it on the coaches because I don't think you can put them in the spot where they're in game one kind of packing it in. Like, I just think it set the wrong signal. I get why they did it, and maybe it works out in the long run, but like you have to think about it at this point. You're 3-9 in your first season. This is your first game, and this isn't a game that you really had a chance of winning at a lot of outcomes. A lot would have had to go right. It being a 10-point game near halftime was I think a win. I think you were handling it well at that point. And then the game gets away from you, and instead of trying to take any kind of positive into next week and give Christian Veyer, who had a bad night, any kind of momentum heading into the next game, you just went the opposite way. And it's just, I kind of struggle with the idea that like if you sold Kirby Smart on this as something you're going to do in the middle of a game, that he would have any, like he might kick you off your coaching staff that night. And when Dell McGee came in from Georgia, you weren't expecting to get what Georgia has done as a program in the last decade, but that's what you thought you were getting. And this felt like a very bizarro opposite version of that, where you're just basically giving up on a game. And losing by 56 when the spread was down in the low 30s by the time the game kicked off, like that is a major underperformance. And it was kind of chosen. Like Ole Miss kept their foot to the pedal. The thing we both got clearly wrong is that Austin Simmons played into the fourth quarter and it was not a game. Lane Kiffin wanted him to get reps, and I think that totally makes sense. And I think we just didn't have the right angle on that. We don't cover the team, so we just didn't necessarily see that coming. But
I will also say, based on some of the bad that he had, he certainly needed the reps. He had some good, like he had a lot of good, but
I just think it's a young guy. You want him to keep getting reps, and they kept their starters in longer than Georgia State, and that's not a thing on Lane Kiffin. He's in game one. He sees there's 11 more games. They play SEC opponents this weekend, so he's using every rep he can get with his young quarterback and getting him more acclimated to college football. Georgia State went the opposite way, and it might pan out, but I completely understand why there was a lot of uproar after the game, because it's like you only get 12 of these. Only 12 of these are guaranteed, and it seems like at about the halfway point of this first one, it was, all right, we're moving on to the next one. And I hope it's a bell they can unring, because it's like a bad message, I think, to set across your sideline in the first game of the season. Like, you need to get them back and play and energized immediately. And the other part of 18 to 22-year-olds is, like, you can get that. Like, you don't have to necessarily worry about that week to week, but I just think from a coaching perspective, you're asking for a lot of faith in this plan to basically treat it like another practice, another lead up to the season, when for everyone else the season started. So I think that's where you absolutely have to put it on the coaches. And there was more slop than you would have wanted. I guess I don't know where you'd put this as far as on the ugly to bad scale as we're working through this, but special team stuff was still an issue. Like, missed the field goal, which that's not even the least of it for me. It's like it was a bad kick. I think the box score might have said it got blocked. I wasn't sure if it looked just bad off his foot, but if it got deflected to line, whatever. You miss a chip shot that would have made it 7-3, and that was after getting an interception on defense, would have kept the positive vibes going. There's a fair catch interference when Ole Miss would have given you a gift, and you would have had a punt downed on the 1-yard line.
The ball was caught.
Blast the guy. Yeah,
there were several steps that were taken after the ball was caught, and then there was the contact. It wasn't a situation where it was a close play.
No, it was not bang bang at all. Just absent-mindedness, not being locked in on the play, and it cost him. That could have been a moment again where, at that point, I think Austin Simmons had already thrown both of his interceptions. You have him backed up. As we'll get to later in some of the positives, the defense was playing aggressive. Certainly we might have seen a blitz there, and who knows what happens, but they start on the 16, they get a kind of reset, and they were hitting chunk plays all night, so I think it only took them 1 or 2 plays to get on the plus side of the field, and so you lost that moment. You go offside on the extra point that would have made it 24-7, and then because you get half the distance and because it's game one and you want to rep some stuff, of course Lane sends out his 2-point conversion, brings in backup quarterback Trinidad Chambliss, who's more of a running guy. They get the 2, and that's just an extra point you just gave them. And then at some point in the second half, Georgia State forces a punt, which had taken a while to get to that point. Trying to look at the box score. Ole Miss only punted 2 times on the night. One of them, you would have started in plus territory, like about the 49-ish. There's a post-play personal foul on Bernard Kazi, moves you back, kind of sets the tone for that drive again, when it could have been a nice moment where you score in the second half, which didn't happen. And so a lot of mess in special teams that you were hoping was not going to show up. And this is the part where, after kind of going on a screed there for a few minutes, it's game one. Like, you think some of that stuff, if it's going to come up, will come up earlier in the season rather than later on, but you've got to get all of that stuff erased immediately. And the quote that Dell had when he spoke about it, and we'll see if he can actually do anything about, like, rather than, like, of course he sees that it's a problem, we'll see if he can fix it, but it's like, you're not going to be perfect within a game, but on special team situations, you have to be. Like, you have to have the attention to detail in those moments, because that's the stuff that really costs you. Even a game they lost by 56, and these weren't the determiners in them winning or losing this game. Like, all of those moments I just pointed to basically could have taken points off the board directly. And we've been waiting to see the special teams be a net positive for this program basically since it's existed. And so, disappointing signs, that's certainly skirting the line between bad and ugly. And it's basically like, week 2, you got to immediately erase all of that. Like, you've got to show professionalism on that third phase that wasn't there at all, or you're going to keep having these issues.
Yeah, I mean, you said that perfectly. There's a ton that happened on special teams that, flush it down the toilet and move on. You've got a game to get ready for this Saturday. We'll see if it happens. I don't want to sit here and just tell you that, yes, it's definitively going to happen. But yeah, there was a lot of it was sloppy, I can understand the talent gap. I think, not to pick on Ted Hurst or anything like that, but, my mind on a lot of the routes, because I was watching him, was to your comments on, okay, is Ole Miss just going to, 1v1 him for most of the game? And the answer was honestly yes.
No, I mean, they had him bracketed. They did take him away. I had that one pegged wrong entirely, which I had a me segment coming up. I set some pretty bad goals for this game. I was not locked in either. It's week 1 for everyone, but I will say let me look at this. We are 17 and a half minutes into the podcast. It's the first time we've mentioned Ted Hurst. Speaks to how the game went. Because if the game was going to go better for Georgia State, he was going to have a much bigger impact. He's targeted, I believe, 6 times on the night, 1 catch for 6 yards, and it came in the fourth quarter. I think they did have a plan to just take him away, and they did a good job. And there were some times he had one-on-ones that he didn't, get separation. There was one time in the red zone after that interception by Shams Jane. He got his feet tripped up. Would have been going his way, probably an end zone shot, but just because he trips, the play's not there. I think the most regretful thing, long term from this game, because there is some of this that you hope it gets cleaned up immediately, but some of this, you're playing SEC team early in the season, whatever. He's not going to get another opportunity to impress. That's going to be the first game NFL scouts put on, and he didn't have his best effort. Some of it I don't think was his fault. The thing I was speaking about earlier about kind of punting on the game, I think he might have been the worst affected by that, because I think if the one stay in the game, you work the passing game in the fourth quarter, he at least maybe gets a nice long catch. Even if it's against the backups, it's something. I don't know what it is as far as saving it, but it's disappointing. I think it's probably a performance he's going to have wanted back, a chance he's going to have wanted back, but the plays weren't there, and some of it was how they chose about to go the passing game, but the rest of it is when you're trying to make the NFL and trying to impress, it is just about winning against your guy, no matter how talented they are, and that was a very good Ole Miss defense, and the secondary was really locked in. It just didn't happen for Ted in this game, and so he's going to have 11 more games to put good tape out there, but this is the one that's going to stand out when people are trying to assess his ability at the next level, and so I do hate it for him in that sense, because I don't think the opportunity was taken advantage of for Ted Hurst and Georgia State in this game.
I hate it too because, if we can shift to some good, I actually thought the offensive line did better than I expected. I really think that they held up in a way that if there's anything to take away from this game, well, there's two things that I want to take, three things that I want to take away from this game. Two on the offense and one on the defense. We'll get to that later. I thought the offensive line and the running, I thought that they did relatively well from what I was expecting. I definitely thought that they were going to pass more and be a little bit more successful. And I know that they went very conservative, so I'm not necessarily, I'm grading on a curve, if you will. But even with that curve, I really thought that they ran the ball relatively well. It's definitely going to be a, committee style type running thing, but I really enjoyed what I saw, from Rashad Amos. I really think he did a good job. I know I'm kind of stuttering through it, but some of his runs where you're facing less talented defenders, I mean, those are huge plays. Those aren't just like, oh, he's getting 5 yards, because he was working for those 5-yard runs. And again, against worse talent on defense, those are very big chunk plays that I think, especially if Georgia State can keep a sort of spread out offensive formation, like that can be huge for an offense like Georgia State, which struggled last year to be a little bit more two-dimensional. So yeah, the rushing attack and the offensive line, I really thought that they did pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, if you had told me the best units I'd feel about exiting this game would be the offensive line and defensive line, I would not have had a 56-point loss.
I would have laughed so hard if you told me the final score after that.
Because, I mean, we were setting the bar like maybe you hit triple digits. Sack adjusted, maybe you're talking 3 yards of rush. They ended up being 191 on the ground, 5.5 yards per carry. And even if you take out the 49-yarder that TJ Payton got in the fourth quarter against the backups, it's still a much better average than we expected. It's 111 yards more on the ground than Ole Miss allowed on average last year, their whole season. I still think that's a good Ole Miss defensive front. I think that the offensive line really held their own, opened up lanes. You saw the vision with all of the guys they brought in the running back room, because nobody got more than 9 carries. Rashad Amos there with 9 for 69. And every time they came in, it felt like a guy could make a play. Obviously you look further down. DJ Braswell had a nice 10-yard run, but he's 5 carries, 19 yards. Not a show-stopping afternoon. Branson Robinson only 10 yards on his 5 carries. But I kind of think that'll be kind of interchangeable, where it's like everyone might get in the ballpark of 5 to 10 carries, and maybe someone gets the hot hand and gets more than that in a given game. But you could tell me any of them are the ones leading the way. You could tell me next week that it'll be Branson Robinson, who only had 10 yards in this game, that is the leading rusher, and I'd believe it. And so I'm interested to see how it shakes out as far as like who the leading rusher is, and like if this is a team in the top half of the Sun Belt in rushing yards who like doesn't have a top 10 rusher in the league just because of how spread out it is. But majorly encouraged by how they were able to run the ball against this Ole Miss defense that I think is very good still. And that you can take forward. And that's also on a night where 12 for 25 with an interception and 69 passing yards combined for your quarterbacks. You didn't have any semblance of a passing game. You didn't throw it but 3 times 10 yards or further down the field. And you were able to do that on the ground. And I don't think hardly any of it was super cheap. Like, you had the 49-yarder, but like it really was, you weren't getting blown back off the line. You weren't getting stuffed for a lot of TFLs. Georgia State had more tackles for losses than Ole Miss did. Offensive line, run game performance, I think, is what you wanted to see. It's like the one facet of this game that I think went pretty seamless relative to expectations. I think you crushed it relative to expectations. It's just, the rest of the game, the rest of everything, you didn't have that.
Yeah, I spent a lot of my Sunday, because I think, was it 2-3 years ago when they played South Carolina? I did something from that game that I tried not to do now, which is, Georgia State played up to their competition. They did something very well. That means that they're going to do that same thing on that side of the ball or in that position group the rest of the season. And the Sun Belt's going to be, for at least that position group, is going to be super easy for Georgia State to be successful. I can't remember which side of the ball it was that I had that taken in South Carolina during the South Carolina game, but I remember thinking that, and I this past Sunday I told myself that, yes, I feel like the offensive line did very well. Not going to say they dominated the game because that would be a lie, but like you said, it wasn't like Ole Miss was just living in the backfield and, totally getting Georgia State off their spot. I mean, yeah, they, hurried the QBs a little bit. Yeah, they at least got first contact at the line of scrimmage, if not right after.
And again, there were times where it was basically set up for them to key off on the pass. Like, the way that they called the game, you just kind of hope it was a one-game deal. Like, not the best debut probably for the play calling of Hugh Jackson as offensive coordinator, but we really will have to wait and see them not play an SEC defense and see how much they open up the passing game to really judge that part of it. It's also the same way that the passing blocking grades was great for this offensive line, but I'm pumping the brakes a little.
They were.
Because there weren't a ton of long dropbacks having to hold them off. Like, it's great that they still held up when they did, but definitely not going to, hang the banner on that one yet. We've got to see them over the course of the season, but I still think you look at that as the best unit on the offense during the game, and you'd flip it to the defense. I think the defensive line, if you look at the numbers, they tell you a certain story. 295 rushing yards, certainly an ugly number. I believe I saw from Michael Katz, who I interviewed, covering the Ole Miss side. It's their most rushing yards in an opener under Lane Kiffin, I believe. So, not what you want. But they pick up 31 in the first half on a little end-around action. You had some quarterback runs, and Simmons got free in a couple plays that were pass dropbacks that he just made a play happen. And there was some scheming up runs that Ole Miss resorted to. They weren't getting blown off the blocks by the offensive line for Ole Miss. And the thing of it is, Ole Miss's biggest worry, if you look at what their people are previewing the season, is their offensive line. And those have not been dissuaged by this outing. But even if they are a bottom tier SEC offensive line, that's still going to be a pretty good one when you grade out all 136 across FBS. So it's, even if they are lackluster relative to the standard of the top of the SEC, it's still talented guys. It's still guys that got recruited to at least one power conference SEC school, if not a couple in the case of some of the guys they have. So, grain of salt, but it's also we were waiting to see if another year together was going to make this group gel and see who took what steps. And honestly, as I'm here showing the box score, the guy who is last for Georgia State is the one who was the most impressive for me, because he didn't have a tackle, didn't actually get a sack himself, didn't force a fumble, no interceptions, no TFLs, just 2 quarterback hurries. But Henry Bryant was the playmaker for this defense in the first game. He just beats the right guard, first quarter, 7-0 game, hits Simmons as he throws on what both coaches have said after the game was going to be a touchdown for Ole Miss. Blown coverage. The guy who gets the interception, Shams Gianni, actually was, I think, the one who blew the coverage to where there's a guy wide open down the sideline. But because Bryant hits him, it's an interception right into the arms of Shams. And then later in the game, you get another hurry. I don't think he got credited, but he was also getting in Simmons' face on the second interception in the end zone, where he just didn't see Jordan Huff, who came over and made the diving interception in the end zone to take away another scoring drive. When you get pressure from your inside guys, your nose tackles, defensive tackles, it changes so much. It makes it so much harder, because that's the worst place for a quarterback to feel pressure from. So the 63 points and the big yards totals given up are going to be kind of the blaring signs from this game. But I think there's things you can look at as encouraging, and Henry Bryant's performance certainly chief among those. I thought he really showed his own against an SEC and SEC offense. And to the point I was making in reverse about Ted Hurst, if he's trying to make a roster, even if it's just a UDFA situation, that's the type of tape that might get him where he wants to go. Maybe get him a back-end draft pick in the NFL draft by a team, because they aren't going to be looking at how is Ole Miss feeling about their offensive line in the season. They're just going to put on the tape and see a guy getting after it in the pass rush.
Yeah, well said. I really think he had a great game. And it's funny because again, he's last in the box score here. It doesn't look like he did much, but even when he wasn't hurrying Simmons, it still looked like he was just sucking up those blockers. And that's what you want from the middle right there. That's the best way to impact the defense. It's always sexy when guys are coming off the edge, but the real dirty work, the real stuff that gets you paid, it's all that stuff right there in the middle. Brian had a really good game. If he's able to keep that up, that the defensive line can be better than it was last year. Which I know that's not a big bar, but it would be a very important thing if they're going to improve on their points per game, which is going to be out of whack because of this, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, they're going to have to do some work there, especially with Memphis coming up is another good offense, so might have a lot of work to do to clean up stuff on the stat sheet for the defense. I'm not going to try and sell you on it was a good game for the defense. You give up 63 points, and only some of that was near the end of the game with some of the backups in. The explosives were an issue. Eye discipline was an issue. Did not think the linebackers played especially well, especially early. The first drive for Ole Miss is 3 plays, 65 yards. They just got picked apart. Looking in the backfield, the tight ends for Ole Miss were a real problem where they just kind of snuck past them as they're looking at the eye candy with the RPO stuff from Simmons. And so that's an issue. Plays where they weren't able to get to the quarterback, maybe he had a little bit extra time and just those routes developed downfield and guys would be there wasn't a guy within 20 yards of them. Big, easy pass and catch for Simmons to get to his guys down the field. There's other pieces of it, though, that I'm less worried about big picture because it's the first drive of the third quarter, they come out of the break, they're up 25-7. You get your first sack, Josiah Robinson gets a sack. It's the first only sack of the game. I don't know why they gave Kazi a sack on the play where it was a quarterback run and it was a forced fumble, but it says there's 2 sacks. I kind of feel like that won't stand the test of time in history this season, but the 1 sack I give for Josiah, a couple plays later, big run for, I think it actually out of the backfield. It was a screen pass. Deuce Walker comes on a blitz, disguised completely. He doesn't come towards the line of scrimmage until the ball snaps. He evacuates that part of the field. They get a running back in that space, and he gets 20 yards. Soon after that, Bernard Kazi comes on a corner blitz. They run the ball right into that spot, and it's a long play. It's going to be a long run no matter what, because he kind of ran exactly where Kazi left. And then good downfield blocking made it a touchdown 42-yard run for Kejuan Lacey. But the thing of it is that wasn't you got your doors blown off you by Ole Miss, just SEC front leaned on you. You made a calculated risk on those plays with some aggressive blitzes from the secondary, and they did not work out. But part of that is you hope DC, Travis Pearson, kind of irons out when to call those to make sure that the guys are going to be able to get home when he calls them, because he's going to leave them really in the lurch if they don't get home. But it's hard for me to that's a coaching decision to take those type of risks play calling, and we certainly saw a lot of blitzing throughout the course of the game, and times like that it really didn't work out, and other times where it wasn't nearly as blaringly loud that it didn't work out, but it was the reason why guys would be wide open down the field. But we got a glimpse that this is going to be an aggressive defense, and so if you're forcing 2 turnovers, winning the turnover battle, you certainly can't give up as many explosives as they did in this game, but that might come out in the wash over the course of the season. And I think as we are left with what does this offense look like? What are they even going to run heading into game 2 and beyond? I think we have a good sense of what the defense is going to take on as their philosophy. And every coach out there is we're going to be multiple, we're going to be aggressive, we're going to get after the offense. But we did see that. The cliches turned out to be exactly what we saw from Travis Pearson and his defense. And yes, a lot to clean up. Missed assignments, eye discipline killed them in this game. But I'm a lot less worried about that side of the ball because you're not going to be facing these SEC offenses. Lane Kiffin is a master of offensive play calling and game design. Him and Charlie Weiss Jr. had that thing working. You're not going to necessarily see that every week. So some of it, it's as the level of competition drops down, not to the basement, but just not where that was. I think some of that could take care of itself. Guys like Deuce Walker, D.I.C. Hopkins, Bernard Kazi getting more games and just getting more experience is going to help in that regard as well. Pearson maybe finding a fuel for the times to make those type of calls and make it get better, but I think ultimately that'll be a benefit, especially if the offense in this early season needs some juice. You might need the defense to have those type of plays, and the defense gave up some big chunks, but they also saved everyone's bacon a couple of times with those 2 turnovers that they were able to force.
And I will politely disagree with Coach on those turnovers. Mostly tongue in cheek, just because last year they struggled so much to force turnovers. So, opportunistic is that word that everybody loves to use so much, but they took advantage. Like that, they found a way to have an impact play. And for a team that didn't have a ton of that last year, I think that is a win. So, not upset about it.
Yeah, to put numbers on that, this is from GameOnPaper.com, which do the advanced stats, give you all those numbers. 8 havoc plays, it's 10% of plays for the defense, and a havoc play is any play ending in a tackle for loss, a fumble, or an interception for a defense. They had 10 against Texas State in the win last year. They had 8 in the 27-20 loss to Arkansas State, and they didn't have another game with more than 6 last year. So in game 1, against an SEC team, you were making those havoc plays happen more basically than you did most games. There were some where it was like 2 or 3, just like you were not being disruptive at all. And so saying you wanted to bring that in and showing that in game 1 is at least something you can take forward. And stuff to clean up, you want to see a lot more guys doing their job they're supposed to do, especially heading into this game against Memphis. And I'm not trying to put lipstick on a 63 burger, but I think that there was stuff that you could be encouraged by. And I'd also say, I believe the number is 199 of those rushing yards, 198, were in the final 2 quarters. A lot of the get time that it was backups in for Georgia State, and yes, for a lot of that backups for Ole Miss. So it's in the first couple of quarters, I really thought they did a good job of limiting the base plays of Ole Miss's rushing attack. And again, that will pay dividends because what we saw last year was a defense that couldn't stop the run, and so offenses didn't have to pivot off of their run game. I think we maybe saw enough that this defense could have something there, and it's going to be about cleaning up just the total busts in the passing game and just keeping the energy going week to week.
Yeah, it certainly could be better. It certainly could be better.
I think we probably said enough. I mean, there's more that I could say, but I think we hit the big things as we're 37 and a half minutes into this podcast. But I think a lot had to be said about that. I think I was left with a lot more worry than I thought. I set the bar pretty high as far as you're going to have to show a lot to make me think that there's problems here. And unfortunately, we kind of got that. Place it most acutely showed is I think people were questioning what's going on with quarterback. I gave the stats earlier, and I don't know exactly what form this is going to take going into the future, but we got some news on that front. TJ Finley, a member of the Georgia State Panthers. He has been at LSU. He's been at Auburn. He's been at Texas State. He's been at Western Kentucky. And this spring, briefly, he had a couple of weeks there at the Tulane program before being off the team with some legal issues that have now been resolved. So this will be his 6th school. The numbers at Texas State, I think, are really what you're looking at. I mean, you see a guy who's been in multiple power conference schools, and maybe the assumption is going to be that you're bringing in a guy with the stars next to his name in his recruiting profile. But I really honestly think what they see is what he's able to do at Texas State. And then sort of briefly, he didn't really have much time at Western Kentucky before he got injured. But in 2023 at Texas State, he was almost 3,500 yards, 67% completion percentage, 24 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. And that was a good Texas State team. They knocked off Baylor on the road in their first game. It was a real, this is who I am moment from G.J. Kinney there in San Marcos. A lot of shrouded secrecy about this. It's stuff that, we'd heard breadcrumbs of all the way back when he was coming to campus. But I think the coaching staff was being guarded about, what if he doesn't get his appeal because he was waiting on the NCAA appeal, if he was going to even be eligible. They held him out of fall camp for the same reason that they wanted to make sure the guys that they knew were going to be here in the fall got those reps, because if he doesn't play, then that's a lot of wasted reps going to someone who wasn't going to factor in for this team. But all of that is in the rear view now. He is cleared for action. He's through his acclimation process. I don't know what it's going to mean for Saturday, but I think it's going to have major implications for the rest of the season. And it's hard to look at whatever you put on the coaching staff versus the players on the field, it's hard to look at last Saturday and say, like, they couldn't upgrade a quarterback. Certainly, you see the reason that TJ Finley could factor in as soon as he is able to get up to speed with this program.
Yeah, I'm not going to use the next 40 minutes to just dog on Christian Veilleux because that's unfair, number one. It wasn't exactly the greatest of situations, so I will give him that grace. But I will also say that nothing that Veilleux or Cameron Brown did inspired me about Georgia State's quarterback situation. And I'm not saying that they can't have a all Sun Belt type season from here on out. Not at all what I'm saying. But like I said at the outset of the pod, I just don't know what is going on with this position group, and I think that's what concerns me. If I take anything away from the game, it's that there are a lot more questions at that position than I think I would want there to be. And again, I know that they went conservative. Yes, we do need to still see, what a 60-minute version of the offensive game plan looks like before we make any rash judgments. But that doesn't mean that you could walk away from last week not at least kind of concerned, And if Finley is the guy who, after a couple practices, a couple weeks of sitting or, however they want to play it, because I believe he was involved earlier this year.
So there was a lot of confusion about this, and some of this is how the coaching staff approached announcing it, because, like I say, I think they could have, he'd been on campus since May, so at any point from then they could have added him to the roster with a out loud caveat of if he doesn't get cleared by the NCAA, he won't play for us this year. And you've seen everyone knew South Carolina running back Rizal Faison was waiting for a decision from the NCAA on if he could play. But he had been in their program, I think, at least from the second portal window, if not all the way back in December. And they were very public about we were talking with compliance, we're trying to get this figured out. But everyone knew all along that South Carolina was waiting on this. There wasn't public knowledge that Georgia State was waiting on this because of how they chose to approach it. And so the way it plays out is the announcement comes from Chris Hummer, Matt Zenitz, and Ben Moore, broke the news for CBS Sports 247. In the middle, right after this game, I forget if it was Sunday or Monday, people was did he enroll yesterday? Are they handing him the playbook? Is he getting out of his car at Center Park Stadium and just getting all of the plays? And that wasn't the case. And so the reason I think for some of that confusion is fair because that's kind of how it was handled from a PR standpoint. But the truth of it is he has been there since May. He went through summer stuff. They've really opened up what you can do in the off season. It's not as closed off rules where players can't practice. You can't be a football or whatever. There's still going to be stuff that he missed out on from fall camp. And, I think it makes sense the way they handled it because they didn't know. But if he had been cleared all this time, I think he would have been in Oxford. He might have been starting. I think if they knew he could play this whole time, he would have been a bigger factor in the battle throughout camp. And that's something we couldn't have known exactly just because we didn't know exactly how, if he was going to be able to play. But he went through the summer. He's gotten to the playbook. The biggest worry I gathered from the coaching staff, and Dell talked about this on either Monday or Tuesday when he did either the Sunbelt call or the media call, was just his arm making a bunch of throws because he hasn't gotten those reps through fall camp. And so I think in the end it would have done him a disservice that he wasn't able to get those reps. And I really don't know how to handicap this. Could he play on Saturday against Memphis? I can't rule it out. It would not surprise me at all. But I kind of think we're a little bit of time away before we see him playing the majority of the snaps.
I'll put it this way. I expect him to I would think based on Coach McGee's comments that he said, because I heard what he said about the arm. I would expect him to dress. It sounded like he is at least knowledgeable enough about the playbook to dress in the event that he's called upon. I don't expect him to be the first one under center on Saturday against Memphis.
I mean, what are we doing to keep getting caught in these situations where it's the App State game with Dan Ellington and his ACL all over again, where it's like we're doing a preview pod and we really can't say all that much certain about the quarterback position. Different circumstances now, but we will be finding out the rest of you. I guess pregame warmups will be a bit of an indication, and so I will have my eye very attuned to whatever is going on and who's getting reps with who. The thing that I think they could maybe swing, maybe it's like he's got 20, and like he's got some greatest hits that he's comfortable with. If you are able to play him and you feel like he can be acclimated already to go out there and play, and you're leaning on his experience there is kind of the reason why. Maybe he's on a snap count, but you've got ideas of the type of route concepts he likes. Maybe he's built some rapport with a receiver here or there, and they run those. Because I think if you can get him up to speed, just based on what he's done in his college career versus what anyone else on the roster has done in his college career, for the passing game, he's your best option. I don't know that we can really make much of a judgment on Cameron Brown because, truth is, if this is the offense you're going to run, I just don't think he's a fit. I just think he's more of a running quarterback, more of an athlete. He didn't look super comfortable running the offense that they have designed for him. And so if it was a world where he had to be the starting quarterback, I just think we would see the scheme look a lot different. I think they would install some different stuff for Cam Brown that because he's the backup in this offense, that's just not the way it went. But I think certainly when you look side by side, TJ Finley's career stats aren't mind-blowingly great, but they are better than what Christian Veer's done in his career. And so I kind of think when all is said and done, over the majority of the season, he'll be the starter, health pending everything. I don't know when that's going to start. I don't know. We might see him starting the Saturday even. But I think the way they've played this, and certainly what you've seen on the field through one game, I think that's the way it's trending. It's just kind of about when it all comes together. But certainly it's never boring in college football. It's never boring around the Georgia State program. And also, frankly, it was a big major college football story about Georgia State football that made people forget about the other one for a couple of days that was taken up. The Tyler Scott stuff got on the broadcast, got on SportsCenter, and local Atlanta TV stations picked it up and were airing his comments and talking about it. So it's that really caught terminal velocity in the sports media sphere. And this also did, and there was a lot of people getting their jokes off about TJ Finley being at his sixth school and all that. But we're going to be through that now. And if he goes out there in any game this year and drops 250, people will forget about it and be like, oh, Georgia State's got a quarterback now, which I think it would have benefited everyone if all of this could have played out in May, June, July, August in the more traditional way. But life doesn't always work like that. Georgia State had to kind of adapt the situation as it was, and we'll see where they go from here.
That's right. I always forget that Finley was the one who threw that game-winning touchdown against Georgia State in that game.
Yes, this is true.
For
Georgia State fans have
forget.
seen him play. If all you do is only watch Georgia State football, you've seen him play because he is the one who led the final minute touchdown drive to go ahead to win that game when Georgia State had Auburn really close to the premature dissembling of Brian Harson's tenure on the Plains.
Sorry, I was recalling that game. But yeah, I don't want to make anything of the schools because I feel like if you look at his bio, which is why I remember that game, I feel like this is such a very normal progression of schools.
It's just the number. It's just that there's 6.
Sure.
And I believe I saw the number that if he does play for Georgia State and record stats, he would be the first player ever to record stats for 5 schools. I'm not saying it's not all a little bit weird. I just think people were taking it maybe a little bit further than was necessary. And it's this is not he hasn't been, he's 23, I believe, is his age. This isn't like a 30-year-old still in college football.
Exactly. That's also where I was going. He was a freshman, enrolling during 2020. So I certainly get why there's been some movement, but he is only 23. This will be his last year most likely, and no, this will be his last year, and it'll be fine. I promise. It'll be okay.
Gonna roll the interview with Jonah Dylan from the Commercial Appeal in a sec, and I kind of think everything we've just touched on is basically going to sum up our thoughts on what the Memphis game is going to be. And Jonah did a great job filling in the particulars about what Georgia State will see from this Memphis team when they come to Center Park Stadium. Kind of feel like we've had our say. I'm fine grouping the TJ Finley stuff into what is going to be our game preview, along with the specifics coming from Jonah on Memphis. I'll wrap it up by just saying, I think this game ended up being a lot more important than it needed to be. I think if you keep Ole Miss around the spread, like I had predicted, I think a 45-14 as the outcome in the game last Saturday, and like there's a world where the game plays out like that. They could have gotten to like that exact scoreline if things go a different way and they keep at it for a full 4 quarters. But Del McGee now is 3-10 in his time at Georgia State. His first impression in the second year is a disappointing performance with a ugly storyline on the side of the game that I think that there's a world where this Memphis game, you're coming home, people are still excited. They knew you weren't going to win the Ole Miss game, but it's like, all right, play competitively, try and win, because this would be a really important win if you're able to swing it against a good G5 program. I kind of think it's flipped now, where it's like the emphasis is going to be on like really seeing a competitive game. And I think if it's another blowout, if it's a game where the offense looks really bad again, it's going to reflect very poorly on this coaching staff. Right off the bat in year 2. And I think that the good news about playing a Memphis and playing a Vandy the rest of this month is you have a couple of opportunities that if it does look good, if you clean a lot of this stuff up, you will be surprised. It'll be amazing how quickly people forget the game at Oxford and Ole Miss. But if this goes poorly, if you are not competitive in this game, the disgruntledness is going to get louder and louder, and it's going to set the team on a pretty ugly path before you even get to conference play. And so, going to roll the sound now from Jonah Dylan, the Ask the Expert segment. He fills you in. And why Georgia State has to be worried, has to respect their opponent coming in, because this has been one of the better programs in the group of 5 over the last decade. Here's Jonah with my interview with him, filling in the details of this Memphis Tigers team. Georgia State's going to play Saturday, 7 p.m. on ESPN Plus at Center Park Stadium. Welcome back to our weekly segment here on the Thursday Night Podcast called Ask the Expert, where we bring on a guest who knows their stuff and can tell us all about Georgia State's upcoming opponent. This week, I'm previewing the Memphis Tigers with Jonah Dylan of the Commercial Appeal ahead of their Week 2 trip to Center Park Stadium to face the Panthers. Jonah, thanks for coming on and joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to chat Memphis, Georgia State.
So I guess place to start would just be your time on the Memphis beat, how long you've been there, and kind of what you've seen, how they've risen since you've covered the program.
Yeah, this is my 3rd year on the beat, so I started about 2 years ago, and it's been interesting. I mean, I've covered back-to-back double-digit win seasons, so we're kind of used to it around Memphis of going into every game expecting maybe not to win, but to be competitive. And again, every season the expectation has been either before the expanded playoff, be the top team in that group of 5, and then since the playoff was expanded, like this team really goes into every season, and I think is going to go into every season, assuming the format stays the same, feeling like it has a legitimate shot to make the playoff with the kind of resources and where the conference is and everything like that.
And I guess Ryan Silverfield, the current head coach, is a third in line of the last 3 Memphis head coaches that have kind of transformed the program. Was Justin Fuente, then Mike Norvell, who had a big win this past weekend down in Tallahassee. In this kind of lineage of turning the Tigers program around, what has maybe Ryan Silverfield's imprint been that you've seen kind of instill like his DNA into the team?
Yeah, well, obviously he was here under Norvell, and so a lot of it was continuing some of the stuff they did before that. I think it's really been the consistency, because you look at like anything of who's gone to the most bowl games in a row or who has the most home wins over the last decade or so, like you talked about, since Justin Fuente got here. And this is a program that has consistently gone to bowl games every single year and more often than not won them. And I think that's really impressive when you look at it over a long span, because you mentioned Mike Norvell, right? Like teams bottom out. We saw with Florida State last year. Sometimes you have a year where things just fall apart. That hasn't happened with Memphis really over the last decade. They've gone to a bowl game every year. and especially the group of 5 level. I mean, that's a tough thing to do. So it's been impressive to see how they've kind of consistently been winning games around here. Obviously, the next step is to make it back to the conference championship game, and they're hoping they can do that this year.
And I guess you mentioned the college football playoff of it all, and certainly it's right now feels as open as any G5 race for that spot has been. Boise losing to South Florida, Army losing, one of the better teams in the American last year. But how much of that is like spoken about by Coach Silver, by the program? Because I know coaches love to be very week-by-week mentality, but is it something that's addressed of like, this is a attainable goal that we think we're going to get?
Yeah, this year not so much. Last year I think it was addressed a little bit more because it was the first year of the expanded playoff, obviously, and also going into last season, Memphis had a very veteran team, a lot of guys who had been with the program for a long time. Obviously, Seth Hennigan was a quarterback here for 4 years in a row. And they had a lot of players who had been with him for those 4 years, and obviously some transfers that came in the past couple of years. So they felt like they were really set up well for last year to kind of be their year. Obviously, it didn't happen. And then this year, again, it's been a ton of transfers and a lot of reloaded talent. I still think this team is very talented compared to the rest of the group of 5. But I think that you look at nationally, Memphis isn't popping up as much as last year in terms of like, here's our prediction for who's going to be the top team and make the playoff. They've always been pretty clear. Their goal is the conference championship. Obviously, if you want to make the playoff, you're going to have to win the conference championship. And look, like I said, they haven't done that since 2019. And so that's kind of been the goal since then of getting back to that game. And once they can get there, then everything is kind of wide open for the playoff.
Obviously, we love talking all through the offseason. We run basically every possible topic because we're so hungry for games. I know it's only been one game, but now that we actually have something tangible to talk about, what do we maybe know now about the 2025 version after their 45-10 win against FCS Chattanooga last weekend?
Yeah, it's almost like you said, we spent all the offseason and then there's an FCS opponent and it's a blowout and we're like, oh my God, we learned so much. And it's like, well, let's wait until we see a little bit of a different level of competition because, you know, obviously I was at the game on Saturday. It was not competitive. Chattanooga had an incredible, I don't know if it was intended, but it was an incredible onside kick to start the game where they just blasted it off the guy standing in the front, basically. And at that moment, you were thinking like, all right, here we go. Then they had a field goal blocked on the ensuing drive, went down early, and the game was never competitive. So I think from the Memphis perspective, this is a new offense than what we saw last year and really have seen in the past because of the quarterback. And the quarterback is Brendan Lewis, who's a running quarterback. He's a dual threat quarterback, and that meant a lot more quarterback run game stuff. And you could tell it opened up a lot in the run game for the running backs too. Like that's the strength of this team. We knew that coming in. We knew we were going to see that kind of stuff. But to see how they balanced on offense in a game where like they could have pretty much done whatever they wanted, there were more run plays than pass plays, and they were clearly committed to that. They were committed to having multiple running backs touch the ball and to have Brendan Lewis run the ball a lot. And I think that's their blueprint for the season, even against teams where the game's going to be more competitive. I think that they're going to want to run the ball a lot. And so I would expect to see more of that moving forward. Now, it's a different type of run than, you know, the Iowa line up in the I formation and run the ball up the middle and get 3 yards and then go for it on 4th and 1 and run it up the middle. Like, actually, sorry, Iowa would never go for it on 4th and 1. They would punt. But, you know, that type of thing, I think it's a lot more side-to-side movement. The whole, you know, the goal is to get the defense kind of off guard. And so we saw that. I think there's questions about the passing game, specifically about the receiving core. But the running game, and especially the way the running backs played and the way Brendan Lewis played, that was my main takeaway from week 1.
And I guess it's been a high-scoring offense basically year on year during this run, but is it a tempo offense? Because that's something that Georgia State struggled with, along with the SEC talent in their opening loss against Ole Miss.
Yeah, it has been. It wasn't so much what we saw against Chattanooga, but again, like they kind of could do whatever they wanted. They've been a team that in the past, and I think you'll see this consistently under Tim Cramsey, their offensive coordinator. He's been here for a couple years. They'll go to tempo when they feel like they have an advantage in the game, but then they'll kind of come back out of it. So when you watch Memphis, you might see a drive where everything goes fast and you're thinking, okay, that worked out really well. They might not go back to it the next drive. That's kind of been how they operate. So they have the ability to do that. And like you said, if they see something on tape of, hey, this defense struggles against that, then I think that is something that they'll dial up a little bit more to try to catch them off guard.
I guess on the other side of things, the defense has maybe been the hang-up as far as what stopped them from being that American champ CFP team, and you know, the 12-team era at least. Only one game against an FCS team, so not a lot to go on, but what were the thoughts heading into the season and maybe through one game on what steps the defense has taken, will take?
Yeah, so in terms of personnel, almost complete facelift defensively. They have one starter coming back from last year. And they had a lot of players last year who were really talented and played really well, even though I know the defense as a whole, it wasn't great. There's a lot of NFL players on that defense. And so now you're bringing a bunch of new guys. They brought in a really, really talented core of linebackers, but everybody's new. And so week one was kind of like, let's see what this thing looks like. Even if we've seen these guys play at other schools and we've seen their stats, like, let's see how they actually play together. And I do think, look, you can spend all the time in the offseason working on chemistry and reads and stuff, but you got to get out there and kind of figure it out together. And I think they're still doing that. I think there were a couple times where it was like, okay, let's make sure everyone's on the same page. But they've got a lot of athleticism on that defense. I think that when Jordan Higgins took over as defensive coordinator, his thing was we're going to play fast. And then he had an entire season, now this is his second year, to kind of recruit players to play in that specific system. And I think he's got a better idea of how he wants to play now. And so he's got players that fit exactly that type of structure. And so, yeah, the defense has been kind of, let's get the offense on their heels. Let's catch them off guard. There's going to be a lot of people, running around. Obviously, it's more sophisticated than that, but there's a lot of movement. And what they're going to try to do is frustrate offenses with their kind of athleticism and speed.
Who are some of the players that, whether it's the Georgia State coaching staff's going to be circling or guys that you're just interested to keep watching as the season progresses? Just names to watch on Saturday.
On offense or defense or both?
I guess both. We can start with the offense.
Yeah, I mean, on offense, Sutton Smith, who's one of their top running backs. So they kind of had this two-headed monster at running back we expected going into the season, Sutton Smith and Greg DuBosier. Greg DuBosier went out in the first quarter of the game with an injury, and we're not sure what his status is going into this weekend. Sutton Smith is an interesting story because last year, game one, quarter one, tore his ACL and missed the entire season. He's somebody that Memphis fans have been really, really excited about since he's been here. He's a home run hitter type running back, right? Anytime he touches the ball, you feel like he could take it to the house. And if he can stay healthy all season, we're looking at one of the top running backs in the conference for sure. And so if Greg DuBosier is out, that means that Sutton Smith is going to be the feature back. And again, somebody who anytime he touches the ball, you've got to be on high alert. On offense also, I mean, this receiving core totally new. It's interesting to see who kind of emerges. Ryan Silverfield has talked about, let's play 7-8 guys, and see what happens. And they did that. They had 10 guys who had catches on Saturday. Now, ideally, I think they would like to have here's who our number one receiver is, and that's not clear yet. Cortez Braham is somebody I would keep my eye on. I think he's going to play more and more. He was a transfer from Nevada, basically was suing the NCAA for more eligibility, got an injunction in the summer and decided he was going to transfer to Memphis and join the roster 2 weeks before the season started. So somebody who's obviously trying to get up to speed as quickly as possible. I guess Georgia State has a somewhat similar situation going on this week. But Cortez Braham, we didn't know how much he was going to play in the first game because he's still learning the playbook and stuff like that. He looked good. He had a touchdown catch. He played last year with Brandon Lewis at Nevada, so they have a lot of familiarity. And someone who I think, assuming that he continues to learn the playbook and stuff, is going to probably emerge as Memphis' top receiver. Defensively, there's a bunch of guys. I think Chris Bracey is a safety who played really well. He's a transfer from UAB. Played really well on Saturday, kind of a ball hawking type player, kind of always around the ball whenever you're looking around. And then the linebacker core, I mean, all three of the Everett Rousseau, Sam Brumfield, Drew Watts, who are their three linebacker starters, all really impressive with what they did last year, all transfers. And if they can really build chemistry together, I think that's going to be one of the top linebacking cores in the conference.
And I guess the last thing to mention, because it's a game in Atlanta, and this game's been on the books for a while, predating my time doing this podcast, your time on the Memphis beat is supposed to be played in 2017. Is there any kind of significant portion of the lineup from the roster for Memphis that's from the Atlanta or the Georgia area? And does this game matter as far as getting into this footprint for recruiting, maybe getting guys a home game in front of some family?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting actually because Memphis, I mean, yes is the answer right off the bat because Memphis has actually been recruiting Georgia in a lot of ways more than they've been recruiting Tennessee over the past couple of years. I mean, I mentioned Sutton Smith. He's from Georgia. A lot of these guys, and obviously one of the biggest recruiting story for Memphis over the past year was recruiting A.J. Hill, who's a 4-star quarterback. Almost every school wanted him, and he's deciding between Florida and Memphis, and chose Memphis. He's also from Georgia, and so that's been a thing over the past couple of years. They've really keyed in on Georgia as a place to recruit from. And like I said, they've been finding success pretty consistently. A lot of guys that are coming from there, and so this is an opportunity to do that. This is, like you said, an opportunity for guys who are on the team and their families who are going to play closer to home. They can be there. And yeah, it is interesting because I think in 2017, I wouldn't have said Memphis is focused on that, but it seems like now they are. Obviously, these recruiting things, they move so quickly. Next year might be a different state, it might be a different area, but for now, Memphis is really focused on Georgia in terms of recruiting, and so it is important for that.
Jonah, appreciate the time. Thanks for giving us the lowdown on the Memphis Tigers ahead of Saturday's game. My thanks again to Jonah for coming on, doing that with me. Like I said at the beginning, that'll be separately released on YouTube. For now, going to be part of the podcast feed just in the middle of this episode. Hope that kind of flow works with you guys. Obviously, feedback, let us know what you think of that. Weird. I am trying all this stuff. I am happy to amend anything that doesn't work. I am just throwing stuff at the wall, continuing to try and make this as what people want from this Georgia State podcast. So, like, ultimately, if we were doing this and nobody was tuning in, it wouldn't be worth it. So it's ultimately about what you at home listening to this or watching this want from the product. So please let us know. With that in mind, I want to move to this next segment because I'm up in the pick'em.
Yes, you are up in the pick'em. Quick recap from last week. Brady had 13 right. I had 12 right. Some highlights between the two. We pretty evenly split those last four picks between Georgia Southern, Fresno State, Texas, Ohio State, LSU, Clemson, and then Notre Dame, Miami. So, I feel like there wasn't anything on here that was too egregious outside of my Southern Miss pick, which, just wanted to have some fun.
I mean, we were flat wrong on Charlotte and Louisiana, but we were together. Nobody saw Rice beating Louisiana coming, and I've got a feeling my 10-2 Cajuns prediction is going to be very wrong this season.
Yeah.
It might be the team I got the most wrong. They've got a mess. Their quarterback is not healthy now either, so lot to clean up there in Cajun land and in David land because you're one behind me in the pick'em.
Yes. Moving on to this week, it's a little bit quieter of a week, just in terms of the matchups. I think, most of our picks are pretty chalky. James Madison plays Louisville on Friday. I don't know what I needed to see last week from James Madison, but I don't know that I necessarily see the upset this year.
I think it'll be close. So yeah, I guess we'll
close-ish, but I
keep
still
it
don't
on.
see it.
We'll keep it on our schedule. For those of you not watching, I pulled up the pick'em that you can see there. We both have Louisville over James Madison, though I think it'll be close. We both are picking Memphis to beat Georgia State. We both have Clemson beating Troy, App State beating FCS Lindenwood. We both have Arkansas winning the first ever matchup between Arkansas and Arkansas State. We both have Southern Miss taking first ever. Wow. Arkansas has not wanted to play this game, and it is happening in Little Rock, so it's not even in the home stadium.
Oh, pigs, come on. That's crazy. Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but that's crazy.
Yeah. We both have Southern Miss winning their FCS over Jackson State. We both have ODU beating NC Central. We both have Tulane getting one on the Sun Belt, beating South Alabama and Mobile. We both have USC crashing Clay Elton's return to Southern Cal. We both have Coastal beating Charleston Southern. And we both have Alabama winning against ULM. We have Louisiana, despite their issues, beating McNeese State. And in one of your off the Sun Belt board picks, I guess this is just on it for the lulz, we both have Chapel Bill getting his first win of his college career over the Charlotte 49ers. I wouldn't pick UNC over a bunch of teams in this sport after watching them get just trounced by TCU, but after watching what Charlotte did against App State, they're one of them. I think the Tar Heels will be fine in that one.
I'm going to steal the split zone duo bit. This is an anxiety bowl. It has to be. Because both the way that I know that that's not how that definition works, so forgive me. But
it's is it anxiety if it's just going to the coach is going to quit? I don't think Bill's going to get fired. I just don't think he's going to see out past this season.
Yeah, I have no idea what they're doing. I don't think anybody has had any idea what they're doing. And then Charlotte just they did not endear themselves well last week. Maybe we're a little bit low on App State. That could be it. But like Charlotte just did not. I don't know how much of the game that you were able to see.
They couldn't move the ball. They couldn't
do anything.
I think I took more away from it on the Charlotte negative side than the App positive side. But if you were hoping App State was going to be just a poor product on the field under Dow Loggins, I think they are at least like bowl team range. Like I think they look like they've hit the ground running. AJ Swan looked good in his debut there, so the 2.5 quarterbacks thing really raised my alarm bells, but it seems like they've just got one, and they're going to stick with that, and they're going to be fine. And Georgia State will have their hands full as ever when they come to Atlanta in October. But I was more concerned about how Charlotte looked in Game 1. Like, I think Tim Albin's a good coach, but I think he has a heavy job ahead of him building that thing up.
Certainly does. I want to make a point. I will keep it just for the sake of posterity, since this is recorded. I did not actually mean to put Missouri State there. Excuse me. We found some errors earlier. I kept ULM over Alabama.
At one point, I was floored when I opened the doc and David had picked ULM to win the game. I was like, David, it's been bad for Bama, but like, I don't think that's gonna if there's any game they're gonna be up for. Like, much love to the boys in Fun Row, but like if there's a game that this Bama team has to be up for, they have to lay it on and put extra 14, 21 points on the board. It's this one.
Yeah, like, Ty Simpson's about to have the game of his life, probably, because if he doesn't, that's going to be bad. But I will keep it here just because, again, posterity's sake. It's like you turned in the test. You might have meant to change an answer, but I didn't in time, so we don't actually have to talk about that.
The first one, Texas at UTSA, nice rivalry. I think it'll be one of the better games of the week. Not a unique take. A lot of people are excited about this and excited that this game is happening and that there's some cross-conference, interstate rivalry stuff going on. Texas State really put it on UTSA last year. Like, really put it on. This game's in the Alamo Dome, and I thought UTSA looked good against Texas A&M. Really effective on the ground against what everyone expects to be a good defense because it's Mike Elko. And so not learning a ton from Texas State, just kind of handling business against Eastern Michigan at home, thinking that UTSA looked pretty good. I'm just kind of leaning the home team here, but I think this will be like a 40-37 type shootout where both offenses are rolling, and it might just be a who has the ball last type deal. But I will go against the belt in this case and pick the Roadrunners at home.
Yeah, I struggled with this one a lot. Not even because of what happened last week, but just these two teams are so, in my opinion, close together. I did a little bit of Sunbelt home cooking, but I also just feel like, I personally feel like we see this where a team kind of surprises in a win. And last year, it wasn't the surprise that Texas State won. It was the surprise that Texas State, they stomped UTSA. I know that was in San Marcos, but still, they obliterated them and kind of woke people up to, okay, maybe the 2024 Bobcats might be something. I don't know that the 2025 version of them will be as good as they were, circa October 2024. But I do think that Texas State will find a way to squeak this one out. But like you said, I think this is going to be... It might not be the game of the week, but if you're a college football sicko like us, it might be your game of the week, probably.
And just to touch on the Marshall one, they lost 45-7 at Georgia. Just to say, if Georgia State had that game against Ole Miss this past week, I think the temperature would be significantly lowered. Like, you wouldn't feel great about it, but they went in there, didn't get totally embarrassed, and it was like, all right, it's Georgia. Like, there's an acceptability here of, like, they're just a really good team. And Georgia State played a little bit below that standard in their game. And so with Missouri State transitioning up from FCS, just think it's a spot where Marshall can get a win for sure. And then I think the only other one is it's a down week. Week one is so great, so there's not going to be nearly as much of just, like, on paper great matchups, but Oklahoma, Michigan, and Norman's a helmet game. You got a nice young quarterback that could have a moment in Bryce Underwood for the Wolverines. You've got John Mateer coming in from Wazoo down to Norman, see what he can do in a spot. And I like Oklahoma here because I just think Brent Venables and his defense are going to make Bryce Underwood look like a freshman. And that's no fault to the young man. It's just Brent Venables' defense make non-freshmen look like freshmen. And so them being the home team and them like really needing a signature win under Brent Venables, I think that they'll get it done here.
I think that last part is why I picked Michigan specifically. Because, yes, since Venables has been at Oklahoma, the defense has been, it's been very good. You know, there are very few games where you look at it, it's like, oh, okay, this is weird that they gave up that many points to insert team here. Because they usually are not giving up a ton of points to anybody. It's that lack of signature win, though, you know, and it's been, I don't want to say it's been long enough, but I truthfully believe that because it hasn't happened yet, I gotta give it to Michigan just because, you know, Michigan is still some level of decent. You know, yes, Harbaugh's been gone. You know, yes, a lot, by now we're really filtering those players out. And like, that's fine. I liked what I saw out of Underwood. I followed his recruitment, just casually, not anything serious. I'm not a Michigan fan. And last week, you know, grade on the competition curve or whatever, and that's fine. I don't know. I thought that it was a good opening salvo for him. You know, and I do not think this is going to be a high scoring game at all. You know, I think whoever is the first to put a 2 in the, you know, scoring column is probably going to win. Like 2 as in 20 or more, is probably going to win. But I think that Michigan will have just enough to get the job done.
And to kind of round out the show, bring it back to what it's all about at the end of the day, Georgia State. We both picked Memphis. I could see this being a game. Like, this is not one I am filing away like the Ole Miss one where I would be shocked if Georgia State wins. But obviously, based on what we saw in week 1, it is hard to expect the level of turnaround you're going to need to beat a good Memphis team, even with it being at home and all that comes with that. So, interested to see, you know, there's a lot of fan engagement going on. There's going to be like carnival rides before the game, I guess, in the plaza area. And first games are always exciting at home, even with maybe a dampener from the way the game played out last Saturday. But this is the start of like put up or shut up time with Del McGee and this staff, because you really can't go 3 weeks into the season. We've seen this team start 0-2 and lose. This wasn't an FCS game because it was Charlotte, but it was a game that Georgia State was heavy favorites in back in 2022. And they drop their openers, South Carolina and North Carolina, and then they lose 42-41 against Charlotte because of that team that they'd just kind of gotten beat up physically, mentally, all of that. And so like, if we're talking about a 45-19 Memphis win next week, even though Murray State looks like a pretty bad FCS team, you're going to worry about where the team's head is at. And you're going to worry about this coaching staff's ability to raise them from a really poor start. And so this is kind of a moment to swing back and get everyone fully back on board versus next week at this time having a lot of people getting off the ship and really worrying about if this program is going to hit any kind of bowl game, everything past that was the hope when you brought in Del McGee. 2025 and beyond. So I really didn't think we were going to be at this point, but this feels like such a consequential game, not even just that it having to be a win, but it just being a game. And so with that cheery note, thanks for listening. I kind of think people, if they're listening to this, were looking for kind of event session, and so I hope you got the flavor for what you're going for. We might have kept more PG than what other people were out there doing because we got podcast reputation to uphold, but I can certainly understand the lack of PG reaction to what we saw. It was a rough one. I think we're going to start to really see what this team is made of because college football is so week to week, and the best news is you have the opportunity to go out there and show that you are better than what you showed the week before. And so that's what Georgia State's going to have to do when they line up against Memphis this Saturday at Center Park Stadium.
Trust me, if my Sunday plans were set in stone a year out, and it was like a 2.5 hour drive to where I was going, and let's just say those thoughts could not be fit for this podcast. So, I know that sometimes we're not as hard on them as we otherwise could be, but this was probably not one of those times.
We're not, at least not suitable for work on the pod, but
exactly.
We'll see where everyone's head is at when the team plays on Saturday. We'll have the recap of that one next week. Looking forward to the start of the basketball season around the corner as well. Thanks for listening. We will catch you next time on the Thursday Night Podcast.